updates. Good morning, Tobago.
Good morning, and welcome back to Good Morning Tobago, guys. We are having interesting conversations this morning, and if you have been following the developments that are happening nationally, you would know that we have had the appointment of two new senior counsels by the president, the Honorable Christine Kangaloo, and so. We saw the appointment of Colin Kangaloo as well as Kerwin Garcia. And this has raised a number of questions and opposition by the opposition and a number of members of the UNC who have come out to speak against it. We have heard from Jerlene John as well as the previous Attorney General, Mr. Munilal, as well as the opposition leader, Ms. Kamala Basad-Bissessa. And this morning we're going to get into that conversation and speak a bit more into that. And I have the pleasure this morning of having in studio Mr. Dr. Mohammed, and someone who is no stranger to the set here, but it is always a breath of fresh air to have you in the flesh, right? So good morning again and welcome. It's
Thank you.
always my pleasure to sit and have these conversations with you. But this morning, we're talking about the comparison between the appointment of Silk to the current opposition leader when she received her appointment, and now they're comparing it to this one and saying that it was totally different because she was extremely qualified as opposed to the appointments that were made to Kerwin Garcia and Colin Kangaloo. And for those people who don't know who those persons are, Garcia and Kangaloo are the husband and brother, respectively, of President Christine Kangaloo, and she was sworn into office, as we know, on March 20th. So, guys, we're going to have this conversation. And Dr. Mohammed, we want to get your overall perspective on this new appointment.
So-
And then we'll talk a bit about the closeness of, that relationship, and do we see it as being somewhat nepotism?
So, to understand how this is done, this is a process, right? And it's an application process for the position of Silk. And it is an application that is put out in the Gazette by the Attorney General. He is charged with the responsibility of putting out the application, the notice that applications are available for those who would have wanted to put in their papers to be considered for Silk, for senior counsel. Now, in yesterday's appointment, it was 17 lawyers in all, 16 of which got the instruments because Mrs. Lynette Cibrand's suite was unable to attend because of the passing of her mom. So she will get her appointment at a later date. But you have names such as Leslie and Lucky Samaru, who has been a senior advocate attorney in family and civil law for many years, right? You have Mr. Larry Lala, who is no stranger to the public domain, who served also, he's the youngest person to serve as a High Court judge in Trinidad and Tobago. You have Mr. Rajiv Prasad, who also served as a High Court judge in Trinidad and Tobago. And the list goes on to talk about the Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions and some other very high-profile names. Those are just a few, including Independent Senator Anthony Vieira, right? When you look at Silk, Silk is not decided by the president. It has nothing to do with the president. In fact, it is literally the president executing one of those duties under the Constitution where she is advised, and advised to the point where she cannot say no, right? So there's a process, and I'll tell you, it says that it's under the criteria, applicants for Silk or senior counsel must have professional eminence and distinction, which establishes them as leaders of the profession. Sound intellectual ability, thorough, comprehensive, and up-to-date knowledge of the law and practice of the fields in which they practice, outstanding ability as an advocate in the higher courts, the highest professional standing, having gained the respect of the bench and profession in observing the advocate's duty to the court and the administration of justice, while presenting their client's case to be and being formidable, fair, honorable as an opponent, and most importantly, total professional integrity, maturity of judgment and balance, and a high quality of practice with at least 10 years experience.
Right.
There are the 17 persons that were appointed. They all meet those criteria.
Right, but there has been questions regarding these two appointments.
Two. And I don't believe in this country that we should throw our hands up in the air and say this is nepotism, or this is cronyism, or this is association. Mr. Garcia, the president, prior to her, and even in her speech, prior to her taking up her appointment as president, made it very clear that her husband had over 30 years experience in practice of law, civil law, more so. And her brother has also been eminently recognized, having sat on the High Court bench, right? The appointment comes through the application process, the vetting process. It is one where the Chief Justice has a say, the Attorney General has a say, the Prime Minister has an ultimate say, right? And then the recommendations are handed over to the President. This is who we have, this is what we want.
Right.
Why are we making much ado about nothing? Because someone happens to be recognized or related to the president. To be quite honest with you, one of the persons that should be in that lineup is Sharon Rowley. Why? Because Sharon Rowley is a senior practicing attorney who has had an eminent career in the legal profession. Had that been done, though, it would have been even worse, right? The opposition is making a lot of noise. What qualified Mrs. Kamala Persad-Visessa? What qualified Kamala Persad-Visessa as Prime Minister to give herself silk? What qualified, I could understand if Mr. Ram Logan wanted it because he had an illustrious legal career. He is a constitutional expert. I'm not a fan of Mr. Anand Ram Logan because I think he was a total failure as Attorney General. But as a legal mind, he's brilliant. So I could understand Mr. Anand Ram Logan giving himself silk. But what great, as I just pointed out, what great respect and legal contribution did Mrs. Persad-Visessa garner over her years in practice as an attorney at law?
To give herself.
To give herself silk.
That's an excellent question. And it moves into
the comparison is that in the years that she has been an attorney at law, she has also been in active politics.
Excellent.
And the contribution that she has made in active politics is null and void in the argument for her to attain silk. So what nonsense is the opposition talking?
We see your point there, Dr. Mohammed, because as I was about to go into the contributions that were made by Senator Jillian John, because she would have indicated that during the time of appointment of the then Prime Minister, when that appointment was given by President George Maxwell, she would have indicated that the Prime Minister, because of her being the first to do a number of things, had really deserved it. And she went on to list that she achieved many firsts in her career in public life, such as being the first Trinidad and Tobago female Attorney General briefly in 1995, while Prime Minister and opposition leader, right? So she would have said that would have been notable as a woman.
Make the linkage to her appearances before the judges of the High Court make the linkage to her legal contribution and her legal submissions and her legal argument with landmark cases, make the comparison, or justify it by talking about um, what what she would have done in terms of making submissions before the judiciary, whether it be the judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago, whether it be the CCJ, whether it be the Privy Council. What was the eminence, legal eminence, that she would have accrued over her career?
And,
None.
sitting in the expectation of comments such as yours coming to the fore, Julian Jones, she would have indicated that Kamala Basad chose to use her legal ability to serve the public interest rather than to gorge on the state's briefs or large fees in private
Fluffing.
practice.
That is what you call fluffing, right? That is what you call also fluffing. The criteria for silk clearly speaks about an attorney's contribution to the legal fraternity. It clearly outlines that the attorney must have gotten the respect of the bench, that they must have gotten the respect of their colleagues, that they must have gotten the recognition of those that were listening to them from a higher order, meaning the judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago and all other legal benches that exist, whether it be the Eastern Caribbean Court, whether it be the CCJ, as I say, whether it be the Privy Council. I mean, Mr. Larry Lala, when you look at his CV, he has been called to the bar in Florida. He has served as a judge in Trinidad and Tobago, and the list goes on and on. He's fought and has advocated in many high-profile matters. The same could be said about Mr. Kerwin Garcia, Mr. Colin Kangaloo, Mrs. Leslie and Lucky Samaru, Mr. Rajiv Prasad, Mr. Dipnarayan Rampasad is a senior, not only a senior, eloquent, respected attorney from San Fernando, but who is also head of his own law firm, right?
Right. But then there's criteria to attain silk or senior counsel, but it's difficult to quantify much of it, because then it says that to attain senior counsel status, they are looking for professional integrity. How does one define professional or measure professional integrity? Strong intellectual ability and high quality practice of at least 15 years experience. And you would have listed, among the appointees, a number of accomplishments that we can quantify. But in areas like professional integrity, how does one really measure
professional integrity? Would speak to the respect that you gather from your colleagues, with the respect that you would have gathered from appearing before the judges of the Supreme Court, would have come from your writing in academic journals, would include you writing and contributing to the legal profession from the perspective of writing opinions, legal opinions,
Okay.
and publishing and all of those things.
Does it have to do with work that is done pro bono as well?
No.
Or work that is done in the public interest?
No, because
Okay.
at the end of the day, that is goodwill,
Okay.
right? When I have a serious problem with people who talk about the goodwill that they do, right? When you do pro bono work, Shenell, when you do public interest work, when you do matters that are in the interest of the public, then it does not, you let the people judge you by it. You don't self-recognize or cause your allies to thump your shoulder that, oh, she's done this, that, and the other. The point is, Mrs. Prasad Bisesa only got silk because she was prime minister, and she gave it to herself. Had she done something of great magnitude in the legal profession, I think everybody who actually was looking on and were actually very upset by it would have, if she had done something great, they would have said, okay, It's well deserved.
Interesting contributions there. But I want to draw back a little bit to the contributions made by Dr. Vaness James previously, talking about that oversight, right? And in regards to these appointments, do you think that maybe some level of oversight and reformation in the appointments and the level of transparency connected to it could really improve the public perception of these appointments?
Shenell, like Dr. Vaness James, I am also a great advocate at this stage of our democracy, especially as it pertains to the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago, as it pertains to our the functioning of our institutions, as it pertains to transparency and accountability of different elements of and organisms of the state. And you just highlighted one, the appointment of Silk. I could go on and talk about how FULs firearm user license are handed out. I could talk about the functioning of how persons are promoted within the public service. I could talk about the financial independence and of Tobago. I could go on and talk about Tobago's autonomy. I could go on and talk about holding people accountable for their actions who are in public office. We are in dire need of constitutional reform. And what I want to say to the people of Tobago and those who may be listening in Trinidad is that if we don't get our act together and we don't start paying attention to the things that matter the most, which is how do we go forward as a nation, how do we go forward as a people, we cannot continue with what currently exists. We're operating under a 1976 Constitution, and a 1976 Constitution that is completely and utterly outdated and is in need of serious coming together of not only legal minds, but the social scientists, the political scientists, the legal minds, coming to stakeholders from the business sector, right? Looking at different models as to how we can reform. When Dr. Rowley...
Dr. Mohammed, I don't mean to cut you off there, but what I want to say is this. When we see the trend behind constitutional reform that has been happening, we see that constitutional reform happens in the benefit of an administration. Similarly to the local government elections that were due this year, we see it shifting. How do we, as the public, as Dr. Vaness James would have stated in regards to creating a mechanism to hold the government accountable, find a means where constitutional reform comes from that policy advocacy? Because we haven't seen it really working where, I'm trying to think about cases where the Constitution was reformed based on a public outcry for X. And it's very rare. So how do we go ahead to trigger constitutional reform in the public interest as opposed to the political interest of our reigning administration?
Because at the end of the day, one of the things that an administration has to do, and that is why I am advocating also for what I call disruptive politics, which would mean that we should, you see the same way Tobago took the opportunity to wipe out the PNM and bring in what was the former PDP, which is now the independent administration. The very fact that they took the opportunity to make that huge shift because they had enough is the same thing that has to happen in the landscape of Trinidad and Tobago at a general election. A new political party must arise. And that new political party must contain persons who are not self-serving. Now the question is going to be asked, next question you would probably ask me is, well, who's not self-serving? There's going to be people who are pure. They have good intentions. They just want the betterment of their country. They just want to see us not be able to be living in fear of crime and having to look over our shoulders when we go to our cars and feel free to walk through the malls and not get followed.
Dr. Mohammed, does the political environment and culture that exists in Trinidad and Tobago, does it
allow
provide for that?
Well,
because it seems like even the persons who go in with those intentions, they get drowned in the culture, the political culture
and you could probably make reference to what is happening now in Tobago, and Dr. Vaness James did make reference to what is going on in Tobago. And the problem is, when you get in there, you have to start constitutional reform from the first day you get in. And constitutional reform must be in your manifesto. And key selling points of constitutional reform must be in your manifesto. I am all for a semi-executive president. Give more autonomy and more authority to the president to hold the country and the prime minister accountable and to hold the cabinet accountable. Give more authority to the parliament to hold the cabinet responsible for their promises. So what Trinidad and Tobago requires is a hybrid system of both the Westminster and the American system as it pertains to accountability and transparency, as it pertains to the appointment of maybe ministers. We need a president that is elected under the French system, where it is the candidates go and they have the debate, and when they debate, on the first ballot they decide who gets beyond 50%, and you go down the route, you go down that line. The name of that process is skipping me at the moment, but the French system is actually a very good system for us to elect a president. It's simple, it's easy, and anybody can run. You don't have to belong to a political party. In terms of the parliamentary aspect, there has to be, I would say, a greater amount of power in the Senate, because the Senate should be more people-centric, more stakeholder-centric. But you see, Shenell, I'm also not going to be giving advice or ideas to political parties, because they may take it. I may get up tomorrow morning and hear Kamala Prasad, Julian John repeating the very thing I just said.
True.
And that's the thing. We also have disingenuous politicians that are existing within our framework now. We need new faces, new perspectives, new ideology. Maybe people that look like you and I to be moving into the thing. However, we do need to take, as I would say this to Tobago, call into account your administration here in Tobago, because there's work to be done. And the work will not get done if they are fighting with Trinidad.
And I couldn't think about a better note to end on for this conversation, Dr. Mohammed. Guys, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with much more.
Tobago updates.